Elizabeth.
And I'm Vivian.
And welcome to the Entry Level Adulting Podcast,
where we help you to navigate the confusing world of adulting,
one challenge at a time.
Welcome, friend. Thank you for joining us on the Entry Level Adulting Podcast, Budgeting, Part 1.
Yes, I think this is the one that a lot of people have been waiting for and requesting from us ever since we said we were doing this. So this is going to be really our intro to budgeting. So if you've never budgeted before in your whole life and you're just looking for a very basic starting point on what to do, this is definitely the podcast for you.
Thanks so much for joining us. So what are some things that you feel like people kind of miss when they try to set up a budget?
I think the hardest part of having a budget is not making it. The hardest part is sticking to it. So
oh my God,
I feel, yeah. So I feel like it's really a challenge of being honest with yourself about your spending and being able to tell yourself no. You have to be committed to actually making this work.
Yeah, because I feel like, right, when you're a kid, you don't really have your own money. Then when you're a teenager, you don't have your own money. In college, you may or may not have your own money. But when you really start to have your own money is when you start to work. And you're like, all the things that everyone said no to, I'm going to do because I can do it. And then you end up poor. And it's not fun.
No, like FOMO is definitely your worst enemy when you're trying to budget because you have to pick and choose your priorities. And at the end, though, it can also work in your favor, right? Because what's great about budgeting is you can decide, hey, these are my goals. These are what I really want to accomplish this year. I want to buy a car this year. I want to, go on this trip, this dream vacation of mine. And then you set aside money for that purpose. Spending that money on that thing kind of feels guilt-free because you're like, yes, this is what I set this purpose aside for. I don't have to feel bad about spending this money because I made this choice and now it's happening. And that it can be really positive.
No, I completely agree, right? Like that's the nice part about budgeting. Because if you want to splurge, you're not going to be like, how am I going to eat next week or anything like that. Like you said, it's guilt-free. You plan for this.
All right. So what then are some strategies to sort of get this guilt-free spending situation? What's the number one that you use?
I like the 50-30-20 rule. So I don't know if anybody's heard of that. So essentially, right, 50% of what you do is your needs, and then 30% is your wants, and then like 20% goes to savings. That way, if there are other things that come up or other things that you want to do, you have a kind of like a slush fund for it to be able to do those things in the future.
Yes, no, I completely agree. The 50-30-20 method is how I set up my own budget. And I think a lot of times people feel like they don't even know where to start. And the 50-30-20 method is a really simplistic way for you to get a very quick snapshot of everything that you spend money on. And so the way it works is 50% goes towards needs, 30% goes towards wants, and 20% goes towards savings. And I feel like the 50% towards needs and the 30% towards wants, a lot of people can just understand that kind of off the bat. You get that you need to pay rent. You get that you need to pay for gas, utilities, food, groceries. Those are all kind of your needs. And then your wants, that can be anything that you spend money on. It can be dining out, going to the movies, fun experiences, the gym. That's kind of what everybody, I think, is comfortable with as far as like if you've never budgeted before, those are the common things that can come to mind. The positive side of that is that's like 80% of what you do with the money that you earn right there, just going towards either needs or wants. So it's really only like the 20% of savings that I feel like really stops people from wanting to budget at all, because that part seems so intimidating. But it's only 20% of what you use your money for. So that's exciting. That should be less intimidating, I think, for first-time budgeters.
No, I agree. I feel like a good place to start is to just look at your spending pattern for a month, right? And see like, on the regular. So like the month of September, right? Or whatever month do not pick months during holidays because it is the worst. Just as a side note for future you. You're going to stress yourself all the way out. You bought Mima a gift, you bought Pookie a gift, and you're like, oh my God, I'm poor. Why do I even go out? No. Pick a month that's just like a regular month for you and say, just really big. All right, you already know rent, you already know utilities, and just kind of see where things are falling and which pile they fall into, needs, wants, or savings, and then what percentage or how much money that is.
Yeah, I think that's a great advice. Definitely don't, there's going to be one-off items in life, but budgeting is just your tool on sort of your basic average day. It's not meant to be so specific for all of those individual things unless you know those expenses are coming, then you can build that into your budget.
Right. Like you don't buy a brush every week, every year. I mean, if that's your life and you do that, okay, then add that into your budget. But there's no reason to be like brush, shampoo every single day. No.
Exactly. So the budget needs to be more general than that because a lot of those things you can't even plan for. So I think when it comes to budgeting, a lot of times people think way too in the details and weeds, and you really just, the whole point of the budget is to help you get a bigger picture. So a tool I like to use is the free budget planner on nerdwallet.com. And that's a great way. They also use the 50-30-20 method to sort of just input what you spend a year on, say, again, rent, your car payments, your student loan payments, gas. I'm looking at my list right here. Those are all examples of needs, right? And then for wants, it could be dining out, it can be clothing, it could be decor, furniture for your house, whatever. Travel is another one. Great for wants, you know? So that's a great tool so you can sort of be getting that kind of yearly snapshot. And again, this is just a side note, just because we might have some slightly more experienced budgeters listening. This is all talking about your paycheck that actually shows up in your bank account. Okay, so when you get paid, and we'll probably make another podcast about this, there's a gross pay that you get. This is before the taxes for like Social Security, Medicare, your 401ks if you're contributing to retirement, which again will be another podcast. So don't stress about that if you don't know what any of that is. But basically, what actually shows up in your bank account is after all of that money is taken out. That is called your net pay. So you should be using your net pay to budget because that's the money that's actually showing up in your account. That's the money you will actually have to spend, if you will, or save.
Right. So if you're moving and you don't know what that's going to be, one of the other really, or you're changing jobs, or maybe you're going to start working in like a different county, but you're not really moving. One of the things you can do is Smart Asset. You can put in how much they offered you. You can put in which location you're going to be in, and it will factor in all the state taxes and federal taxes for you. That way, if you're unsure what that will be for you in the future, exactly, at least you have a resource that will kind of give you a ballpark idea of what you'll kind of actually be bringing home. And for people who don't necessarily do that, just look at your pay stub, right? Or if you're like, well, it can be up and down, right? Like 1 week it'll be this, the next week it'll be that. Take all your income for 1 month and just do an average of what it is, like for the whole month, about how much did you make. That way you can always have at least a template to start with.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. So what Vivian's saying is, like, say you don't make a salary, say if you have hourly income and it's maybe not steady from week to week, just take an average then so you can just estimate out what you make in a year. And that's a great place to start.
Lower number though. Don't over aim. Like if you're like, oh, well, this one time I brought home like, I don't know, $2,000 for the month. And then the next month it was like 500. Don't estimate like with the 2,000 if that's not going to be steady for you.
Definitely. Be honest with yourself, guys. Like, this is a tool to help you. So if you have targets, that's great, but be honest with yourself and average out, and definitely budget lower as opposed to higher, because it's always nicer to have a surprise more money than less. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about the 50-30-20 rule, which is basically 50% of that take-home pay goes to your needs. So that's like the basic necessities of food, shelter, clothing. To cover your butt keep you sustained, that's what half of that take-home pay goes towards. So for a lot of people, though, if you're on, not making as much money, say you're making like $35,000-$40,000 a year, the reality is rent is expensive for our generation nowadays. It just is. No matter where you are, no matter if you've got roommates and you're doing everything you can, it's just expensive. It just is. And so sometimes that might be a bigger percentage of your take-home pay because it's just more expensive nowadays. And so it's okay if, say, your rent takes up more of that 50%. Say you're paying actually 50% in rent. And so then you still have to cover the rest of your needs for utilities and groceries and stuff. Say your needs are maybe more like 60% of what your take-home pay is. That's not the end of the world. That's reality for a lot of us. And so what you can do for that is, though, if you know that, okay, this is more like 60%, sometimes even 70% of your take-home pay, the benefit of that is in the 50-30-20 method, you have 50% towards needs and 30% towards wants. So that's 80% of your income that you have wiggle room with. So say you got 60 towards needs, then you can still put 20 towards wants. You just have to cut back on that disposable spending that you can do. Like, just say if that's the case, you just won't be able to eat out as much. And that's okay, but you just have to be able to have the discipline with yourself to say, no, I would like to buy my groceries this week as opposed to eating out to dinner, going to that movie. You just have to be more honest about what that want spending is and maybe curb that so you can live in a nicer place. That's what we're talking about when we talk about priorities on where you're going to put your money. Some people living in a nicer place, spending less on wants. Some people don't care if they're living in a basement or sharing a bedroom, and they'll save money on rent so they can do more activities. And that's okay too. Right. That's perfectly valid.
So you, like Elizabeth was saying, you just have to prioritize what you want and what you're willing to spend your money on. But, with that, then it's really important that if you make that decision to, I'm going to spend more on rent or on my wants, that you try and stick with it. That way you don't end up owing a whole bunch of money on like credit cards or with loans, because that's ultimately the goal, right? Our generation is notorious for having a large amount of debt, right? With school, with credit cards, and we're trying to help other people our age move away from that. That way, if there's things in the future that they want to buy, like a house or a car or a boat, they can. Like they have the money and the ability to do it because they're not paying off a whole bunch of loans from credit card debt that could have been avoided.
Yeah, and we're definitely going to go into credit cards and debit cards in another episode and kind of walking through those. But basically, that 80%, the needs and wants, a lot of people get that, right? But what I think our generation especially struggles with is that 20% towards savings. And so if you have no savings and you don't know where to start, take 20% of your take-home money and start building up an emergency fund. If you have no savings whatsoever, the very, very first step one, is build an emergency fund. So, Vivian, do you want to talk about what an emergency fund is?
Yeah, so an emergency fund is essentially put away savings that you have to be able to cover yourself if, let's say, if you have a car, if all of a sudden there's an issue with your car and there has to be maintenance. If there is an issue and you have to go to the hospital for some reason, and if, again, with this age group, if you don't have health insurance and you have to pay now for this medical bill, which can be kind of expensive, even on the lower end, it's probably at least going to cost you $150 and up. Okay. And then also, right, this can go into other things like being able to put a down payment on a car, on a house, or being able to start working on your retirement fund, because nobody wants to have to work forever if you don't have to.
Or even, especially with COVID nowadays, say you unexpectedly get laid off, furloughed, or transitioning to a new job, and this can cover rent for the month of transition that you have between.
Or an unexpected plane ticket that you have to buy.
Yes, so that's sort of the purpose of the emergency fund. It's basically just for your rainy day, and you get to decide the purpose of it, but it's money that is not supposed to be touched. So don't be using your emergency fund to pay off your credit card bill. That's not the point. unless you're like thousands of dollars in debt, then maybe that is the point. But what we're saying is the emergency fund is just that. It is in case of emergencies. It is not meant for your day-to-day expenses. So when you're putting money aside like this, it is with the idea that I am not allowed to touch this. This is not money that is available to me anymore, unless it is that, emergency break open the piggy bank kind of situation.
Because, right, nothing's worse than getting into a situation and like scrambling for how you're going to have to pay it. And then you have to use more of your credit limit than you probably wanted to. Now you're not able to make your payments. Now you have to increase the amount of, and you're like struggling for months, right? As opposed to being, even if it's like something important, like if your family member needed help or something and you didn't want to tell them no, right? But now you're in a situation also because you helped them. It can also be for that. Just preparing yourself for something to happen, because it will, unfortunately, and not having to stress about how you're going to find the money to be able to take care of yourself and not like ruin your financial credit or what you've been able to accomplish up until this point.
No, that's exactly right. So basically, to summarize, so we don't completely overwhelm first-time budgeters, congratulations. Thank you for listening to this podcast and taking this step and even wanting to budget and taking that initiative. Honestly, that is step one. That's great that you're even here and thinking about budgeting, because a lot of people aren't. And so to sum up, your first steps, if you actually want to make a budget, go to nerdwallet.com, use their free budget planner to do the 50-30-20 method. Look at what your spending is on a normal time and make the priority checklist on how much do I want to pay in rent? How much do I want to pay for wants and needs and going out and stuff? Kind of determine what matters to you in those categories, and then start setting up your emergency fund. So Vivian, how much of an emergency fund should you make?
So, right. The other thing I want to bring up, though, about your savings, if you haven't had a savings yet, if you have a hard time about not touching that money, it'd be a really good step to just open a separate saving account that's just for your emergency funds. That way you don't have easy access to it. It's there, you put money in it, but it's not right next to you to just be able to pull the, oh, well, this is an emergency, I needed a latte. No.
So Vivian, now that you say that though, real quick, in case people don't know, what's a savings account versus a checking account at a bank? What's a saving, like how do you open one? What's all that?
Okay, so to be able to open a savings account, so all banks offer saving and checking accounts, right? And depending on how you already have your one established, it could be savings or checkings. Now, savings is nice because you can get a little bit more than keeping the money in your checking account. The other
more interest specifically.
Yes. The other issue or the other difference between saving and checking is that savings has a certain amount of withdrawals that you can take from that account. And the reason why is it's supposed to encourage you to save money and not take out money, to be able to build towards saving towards whatever you want. So I'd say if you don't have one, to form one. If you have one and you're not using it as a saving, let's say you're using it more as a checking, it's fine then to open up another account with, say, a different bank to save it. That way it's separated and your access to it isn't quite so easy.
Yep, those are all great tips. So again, just to emphasize what Vivian is saying, your checking account at a bank is kind of what you use to pay off all your normal bills. It's kind of the money that you're expecting to leave the bank very quickly because it's being used to pay your bills and pay for your spending, your wants. Your savings account is designed to be money that stays in the bank longer because you are literally saving it. You're not expecting that money to leave often. So that's what Vivian means by having a limited number of transactions a month. The bank actually limits you or penalizes you if you go over that number of transactions, because the whole point is that you save. So back to the question for the emergency fund, because that's a great point. Separating it out is a great way to make sure you don't touch that money. I personally use Ally Bank, which is an online bank, and they offer a savings account that has a tool called Buckets, and that allows you to set up actual buckets within a specific account, so you're not having to go over that transaction limit. So that's another way you could do it, but that's a tool just unique to Ally Bank. So back to the question of an emergency fund, though. How much of an emergency fund do you need?
I like to put at least 5 to 10% of my paycheck into an emergency fund. And that's specifically separate from the saving. Like within my savings account, I said, okay. And it depends on the month, just because like sometimes extra months I'll have extra money. So I'll put extra money into my savings. But at least a minimum of 5%. And if I can push it up to 10%, then that's like a good month for me. And that I put away and is not touched unless needed.
Yeah. So Vivian is kind of like the super saver. I'm still working on it. So for me, my goal was to have at least approximately 5 to 6 months of my typical spending. So to cover like 5 to 6 months of rent, of groceries, of everything. So in case like I got laid off, I suddenly had no income, whatever it was, I would have that fund to touch. So when I was living at home, I was able to be fortunate enough to live at home and use that time to build up that emergency fund. I have not contributed to it since. That was money that I built up, and it just sticks there now in investments making interest. My goal is to get back to contributing to it, but that was a place I started because I had other expenses come up for moving. I just recently moved, and other life things happen, and that happens, but the goal is to kind of get back to like what Vivian is saying, slowly building up that emergency fund in your savings. And so a good measure of that is kind of my method of having a certain amount of months worth of expenses saved up, or like Vivian said, regularly contributing a small percentage of your actual paycheck.
So, I hope that was helpful for you guys. I hope it wasn't super overwhelming. Again, the goal that we're trying to do is just to get you to look at your money and where it's going and how it's coming in, right? So, people are always like, oh my gosh, I wish I had $1 million. I wish I had $1 million. I'm like, yeah, but if you're going to blow it anyway, right, you shouldn't have got it. At some point in your life, right, maybe you won't get $1 million, but maybe $500,000, maybe $250,000. What are you doing with that money, right? So would it matter if you got it all at once or over the span of 10 to 20 years? And just to get people to start thinking about that. Well, if you had this money, right, if somebody told you within the span of 5, 10, 30 years, you were going to make $500,000, what were you trying to do with that money, right? Because if you had poor budgeting and saving habits before you got it, if you couldn't manage it over a long span of time, you're not going to be able to manage it when you get it all at once.
Yep, she's absolutely right. So this is a great place to start. Just to sum up once again, 50-30-20 method, you can Google it. We did not make this up, guys. This is definitely out there. We hope that we could at least bring it to you. It's on the internet. 50-30-20 method for budgeting, nerdwallet.com, smartasset.com. Also out there, not sponsored, just tools that are great to use.
And that's our show for today.
Thank you for joining us. We'll see you on our next podcast.
We hope you continue to face adulthood head on. We've got this.
Follow us at Entry Level Adulting on Instagram, intro and outro music by @DQ_on Twitch.
Bye, friend.